It was a warm afternoon on July 30th, 1975, when Jimmy Hoffa adjusted his tie, glanced at his watch, and stepped out of his maroon Pontiac. Outside the Matches Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, the hum of traffic and faint murmur of distant conversations filled the air. Hoffa, always a man of precision, appeared impatient as he scanned the parking lot. He was waiting for men he trusted enough to meet, but feared enough to bring an edge of anxiety to his demeanor. Witnesses later reported seeing him pacing, his movements sharp and deliberate. He checked his watch again. One observer claimed he muttered something under his breath before leaning against his car, arms crossed, his iconic presence undeniable even in casual frustration. But then something shifted. At some point between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, Jimmy Hoffa walked toward a car that had just pulled up confident, yet cautious, and disappeared. No one ever saw him again. What happened in those fleeting moments? Who was in that car? And why, after decades, does his disappearance still send shivers through the corridors of American history? This is the last confirmed sighting of a man whose absence would spark one of the greatest mysteries of all time. To understand the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, you first have to understand the man, a figure who loomed larger than life in mid-century America. Hoffa wasn't just a labor leader, he was a force of nature. Born to a coal miner's family in Brazil, Indiana, Hoffa's early life was marked by hardship. His father died when he was just a child, and Hoffa's mother moved the family to Detroit, where he grew up amidst the grit and grind of working-class struggle. By his 20s, Hoffa had found his calling, championing the working man. He began organizing workers for better wages and conditions, using his sharp mind, quick wit, and sheer determination to rise through the ranks. Hoffa's name became synonymous with the Teamsters Union, a behemoth representing truck drivers and warehouse workers across the country. In 1957, he became the union's president, and under his leadership, it grew into one of the most powerful labor organizations in American history. But Hoffa's rise wasn't without controversy. His tactics were as ruthless as they were effective. He wasn't afraid to twist arms literally or figuratively to get results for his members. This made him a hero to workers, but a threat to corporations and even the federal government. And then there was his darker side, Hoffa's deep ties to organized crime. The Mafia loved Hoffa for the power he wielded, but they also feared his ambition and fiery temper. To his allies, Hoffa was a man who would move mountains to protect his own. To his enemies, he was a dangerous man who played by his own rules. To everyone else, he was larger than life, a man whose voice could roar across picket lines or echo in smoke-filled backrooms where deals were struck and enemies made. Jimmy Hoffa wasn't just a union leader. He was a symbol of power, defiance, and the working-class struggle. And it was this blend of charisma and controversy that would make his disappearance one of the most infamous mysteries of all time. Who would dare challenge such a man, and how could they make him vanish without a trace? Jimmy Hoffa didn't just rise to power, he fought his way there, and in doing so, he created a trail of enemies who would haunt him until his final days. As the president of the Teamsters, Hoffa wielded immense influence over America's labor force. He was a man who could make or break fortunes with the stroke of a pen, and he didn't shy away from using that power. But in the shadow of his success, darker alliances began to form. Hoffa's relationship with organized crime was no secret. The Mafia viewed him as both an ally and an asset, a man who could deliver on promises and keep the money flowing. In return, Hoffa relied on their muscle to expand the Teamsters' reach, crush dissent, and silence his rivals. This symbiotic relationship made Hoffa untouchable for a time, but it also put him in the crosshairs of powerful men who were as ruthless as he was. Hoffa's combative personality didn't help matters. He wasn't just tough. He was confrontational, often going toe-to-toe with those who opposed him, whether they were government officials, union rivals, or mob bosses. His fiery temper and refusal to back down made him a polarizing figure. To his supporters, he was a fearless champion. To his enemies, he was a dangerous man who couldn't be controlled. In 1967, Hoffa's downfall began when he was convicted of jury tampering, attempted bribery, and fraud. Sentenced to 13 years in prison, his enemies thought they had finally neutralized him. But Hoffa wasn't the type to fade into obscurity. From his prison cell, he continued to exert influence over the Teamsters, refusing to relinquish his grip on the union. In 1971, his fortunes seemed to turn when President Richard Nixon commuted his sentence under the condition that Hoffa step away from the Teamsters leadership. But Hoffa wasn't a man who could be silenced. He announced plans to regain control of the union, setting off alarm bells in the Mafia. His return to power threatened to upend lucrative deals between the Teamsters and organized crime, creating a dangerous storm of resentment and fear. By the time of his disappearance, Hoffa was a man with a target on his back. His enemies weren't confined to one corner, they were everywhere. From the Mafia figures who saw him as a liability to union rivals who wanted him out of the picture, Hoffa's list of adversaries was as extensive as it was lethal. And in a world where loyalty was fleeting and betrayal could mean death, Hoffa's determination to reclaim his throne may have sealed his fate. The question wasn't if someone wanted Hoffa gone, it was who had the audacity to do it and the power to make him vanish without a trace. On the morning of July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa was a man on a mission. He told his family he was headed to a meeting, an important one. He named the attendees Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a feared Detroit mob enforcer, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a New Jersey Mafia captain with a notorious temper. These weren't just associates. They were men deeply tied to organized crime and, crucially, men Hoffa had clashed with in the past. The meeting was supposed to take place at the Matches Red Fox, a restaurant located in the affluent suburb of Bloomfield Township, Michigan. Hoffa's wife, Josephine, said he seemed calm when he left, though he was never one to let on if something troubled him. He wore a navy sport coat and slacks, his usual polished demeanor intact, but beneath the surface, tension brewed. Hoffa had a long history with both men, especially Tony Pro. The relationship between Hoffa and Provenzano was anything but cordial. At one time, they were close allies, but by 1975, their friendship had soured into animosity. The source of their feud was both personal and professional, with threats of violence exchanged on more than one occasion. Some accounts even claim Provenzano had told Hoffa outright that he'd kill him before letting him regain control of the Teamsters. As for Giacalone, he was supposedly the mediator, the one arranging the meeting to smooth things over. But in the world of organized crime, even a peacemaker could have ulterior motives. Hoffa trusted Giacalone enough to show up, yet he also knew the risks of dealing with men like him. Hoffa arrived at the restaurant just before 2 in the afternoon. Witnesses recall seeing him in the parking lot, pacing and checking his watch. The minutes stretched on, and by 2:30, Hoffa's frustration was evident. He called his wife from a nearby payphone, telling her he'd been stood up and would return home soon. But Jimmy Hoffa never made it back to his family. Somewhere between that call and the next few moments, he vanished. The meeting he spoke of was never confirmed to have taken place. Giacalone and Provenzano both denied being there, and no one stepped forward to corroborate Hoffa's story. Had the meeting been a setup? Were Hoffa's enemies luring him into a trap, or had the encounter been cancelled altogether, leaving Hoffa vulnerable to another assailant? The absence of answers casts a long shadow over that day, and the roles of Tony Jack and Tony Pro remain a source of endless speculation. One thing is certain: whatever happened to Jimmy Hoffa, it started with this mysterious meeting, one that may have been orchestrated by the very men he thought he could outmaneuver. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa's day began like any other. He left his lakeside home in Detroit and drove his maroon Pontiac Grandville to the Matches Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township. It was a suburban spot far removed from the gritty streets of Detroit where Hoffa had made his name. But this wasn't just a lunch meeting, it was a crossroads moment. Hoffa believed this meeting could secure his path back to power, or so he thought. Hoffa arrived at the restaurant parking lot around 2 in the afternoon. Witnesses reported seeing him standing outside his car, glancing repeatedly at his watch and pacing with a visible edge of impatience. By 2:30, his irritation got the better of him, and he made a phone call from a nearby payphone. He told his wife that the men he was meeting, Tony Giacalone and Tony Provenzano, hadn't shown up. Then something strange happened. Witnesses claimed to see Hoffa speaking briefly with someone in a car. The description of the vehicle and its occupants was vague, muddied by the typical hustle and bustle of the area. Hoffa then entered the car willingly, as if he recognized the driver. He wasn't forced or dragged. He stepped in of his own accord. That would be the last time anyone saw him alive. When Hoffa failed to return home that evening, his family knew something was wrong. This wasn't a man who went off the grid. By 10 that night, his wife called police to report him missing. Investigators quickly found Hoffa's Pontiac Grandville still parked neatly in the restaurant lot. The vehicle was unlocked, and no signs of a struggle were evident. It was as if Hoffa had simply walked away from his life. What followed was a flurry of confusion. The police scoured the area, interviewing witnesses and tracking down leads, but the timeline remained maddeningly incomplete. Between the moment Hoffa placed that phone call and the discovery of his abandoned car, an entire chapter of the story was missing. Where had he gone? Who had he met in that car? And why was there no trace of the man who had once been one of the most powerful figures in America? The vanishing act was almost too perfect. No blood, no signs of violence, and no immediate clues. It was as if Hoffa had been plucked from existence, leaving only questions in his wake. But in the world of organized crime, perfection often has a price. Whoever orchestrated Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance wasn't just trying to silence him, they wanted to erase him entirely. The clock was ticking, and every moment without answers deepened the mystery. Where was Jimmy Hoffa? And who was behind his calculated disappearance? These questions would torment investigators, family members, and the nation for decades to come. When Jimmy Hoffa didn't return home on the evening of July 30th, 1975, alarm bells sounded almost immediately. Hoffa was not a man who vanished without explanation. His wife, Josephine, knew something was wrong and contacted the police, setting in motion one of the most high-profile missing persons investigations in American history. At first, local authorities took the lead, combing through the parking lot of the Matches Red Fox restaurant. They found Hoffa's maroon Pontiac Grandville parked neatly in its spot, but no evidence of foul play. The lack of any physical trace of Hoffa, no blood, no signs of struggle, not even a dropped personal item, was both baffling and ominous. Within days, as suspicions of foul play mounted, the FBI took over the case. This was no ordinary missing persons report. Hoffa's high-profile status and his deep connections to organized crime turned it into a national story. Agents knew they were dealing with a potential hit orchestrated by the Mafia, a world shrouded in secrecy, where silence was enforced with blood. The first challenge was the sheer absence of credible witnesses. While a few people claimed to have seen Hoffa speaking to someone in a car, their descriptions were vague and inconsistent. Investigators found themselves chasing shadows, trying to piece together a timeline from fragments of unreliable accounts. The FBI began by focusing on Hoffa's scheduled meeting with Anthony Tony Giacalone and Anthony Tony Provenzano. Both men denied being at the Matches Red Fox that day, and their alibis were as airtight as they were suspicious. Giacalone claimed he spent the day at a health club, while Provenzano insisted he was in New Jersey. Both men's stories were backed by witnesses, likely associates who knew better than to contradict their bosses. The investigation then turned to Hoffa's known enemies, a list that stretched deep into the underworld. The problem wasn't finding potential suspects, it was narrowing them down. Hoffa had crossed paths with some of the most dangerous men in America, and each had a motive to see him silenced. Adding to the difficulty was the Mafia's code of silence or omerta. Those who might have known something were either unwilling to talk or too afraid to do so. The FBI faced a wall of defiance and fear, where questions were met with shrugs and knowing glances. Despite the challenges, the FBI pressed on, launching an exhaustive search that included surveillance, interviews, and even covert operations. Agents raided mob hangouts, questioned union members, and tapped phones, hoping to catch a stray piece of information that might crack the case. But Hoffa's disappearance was a masterclass in precision. Whoever had orchestrated it had left no loose ends. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, but the investigation remained at a standstill. Each lead seemed to loop back to the same frustrating conclusion. Someone knew what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, but no one was willing to say. The FBI wasn't ready to give up, but the shadowy world of organized crime wasn't giving anything away. The question that haunted investigators wasn't just who took Jimmy Hoffa. It was how they managed to make one of the most powerful men in America disappear without leaving a trace. As the investigation unfolded, the list of suspects in Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance read like a who's who of organized crime. At the center of this tangled web stood Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, the two men Hoffa claimed he was meeting that fateful afternoon. Both denied any involvement, their alibis as suspicious as they were calculated. Giacalone, a Detroit mob enforcer with a reputation for intimidation, insisted he had spent the day at a suburban health club. Witnesses confirmed seeing him there, but skeptics questioned the convenience of his timing. Why would a man known for his ruthless efficiency spend the exact hours of Hoffa's disappearance lounging at a spa? Then there was Provenzano, the volatile New Jersey Mafia captain with a long-standing grudge against Hoffa. Tony Pro claimed he had been in New Jersey at the time, far from the matches Red Fox. His alibi was bolstered by trusted associates, individuals unlikely to contradict their boss. Provenzano's history with Hoffa, however, painted a darker picture. The two men had once been allies, but their relationship had soured over disputes involving union control and personal betrayals. It wasn't hard to imagine Provenzano wanting Hoffa out of the picture permanently. The web of suspects didn't end there. Other mafia figures, such as Russell Bufalino, a powerful Pennsylvania crime boss and close associate of both Giacalone and Provenzano, also came under scrutiny. Bufalino was known for his meticulous control and ability to orchestrate events from the shadows, making him a figure of interest in the eyes of investigators. Closer to home, the FBI turned its attention to local mobsters in Detroit. Allegations surfaced about a possible clean-up crew assigned to dispose of Hoffa's body. Theories pointed to men like Salvatore "Sally Bugs" Bergoglio, a feared hitman known for his loyalty to Provenzano, and Frank the Irishman Sheeran, a Teamster with alleged ties to Hoffa and the mob. Sheeran would later claim involvement in Hoffa's murder, though his confession remains controversial and unverified. What made the investigation even more maddening was the sheer precision of the operation. Whoever was responsible for Hoffa's disappearance had planned it meticulously, leaving no loose ends. Surveillance efforts revealed a culture of secrecy and fear, where even whispers of cooperation with law enforcement could mean death. As the web of deception tightened, each suspect seemed both guilty and untouchable. Their alibis, though suspicious, were frustratingly difficult to disprove. The deeper investigators dug, the more the leads seemed to circle back to the same infuriating conclusion. Everyone had a motive, but no one could be definitively tied to the crime. The lack of physical evidence only deepened the mystery. Where was Hoffa's body? How had such a high-profile figure been erased so thoroughly? And who among these shadowy figures had orchestrated the plan? The suspects formed a sinister mosaic of ambition, betrayal, and fear, but the picture they created offered no clear answers. Every thread investigators pulled only revealed more layers of secrecy, making the hunt for Jimmy Hoffa's fate feel like chasing a ghost through the labyrinthine world of organized crime. The afternoon of July 30th, 1975 was unremarkable to most, yet it became a day etched in history through fragmented testimonies and fleeting glimpses. Witnesses near the Matches Red Fox restaurant recalled seeing Jimmy Hoffa waiting impatiently in the parking lot. He was pacing, glancing at his watch, and muttering under his breath, clearly annoyed at being kept waiting. But what happened next? One witness, a local truck driver, claimed to have seen Hoffa near a maroon Mercury Marquis parked nearby. The car was occupied by three men, though their faces and identities remain unknown. The driver stated that Hoffa approached the vehicle and appeared to exchange words with its occupants before stepping inside. This detail, if true, suggested Hoffa willingly entered the car, perhaps recognizing someone he trusted. Another passerby reported seeing a dark-colored sedan speeding away from the restaurant parking lot around the same time Hoffa vanished. The vehicle's sudden departure raised suspicions, but no one could confirm its connection to Hoffa. Then there was the testimony of an employee at the nearby hardware store who remembered Hoffa making a brief phone call from a payphone in front of the restaurant. This aligns with Hoffa's reported call to his wife, in which he expressed frustration that the men he was waiting for, Tony Giacalone and Tony Provenzano, had not shown up. The employee noted that Hoffa seemed angry but composed during the call, giving no indication of fear or suspicion. Despite these accounts, there were no credible sightings of Hoffa after that point. Witnesses described the parking lot gradually emptying as the afternoon wore on, with no clear indication of what might have happened. This absence of definitive details only deepened the enigma. The witnesses' accounts, though intriguing, were riddled with inconsistencies and gaps. Some descriptions of vehicles and individuals were vague, others outright contradictory. Was Hoffa abducted by force, or did he willingly step into a trap? And who were the men in the mysterious car, if they even existed? Investigators scoured the area for more witnesses, hoping to uncover a missing piece of the puzzle. Yet the testimonies offered more questions than answers. If Hoffa had been taken against his will, why didn't anyone see a struggle? If he left voluntarily, who could have convinced him to trust them? Every potential lead seemed to evaporate under scrutiny. Witnesses who might have seen something crucial either didn't realize its importance or were too frightened to speak up. The secrecy of the underworld loomed large, casting doubt over even the most credible accounts. In the end, the witnesses provided glimpses into the moments before Hoffa vanished, but no clarity on what happened next. Their fragmented stories painted a murky picture, one that only added to the frustration of investigators and the enduring mystery of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. Jimmy Hoffa's maroon Pontiac Grand Ville sat quietly in the parking lot of the Matches Red Fox restaurant, a silent witness to his disappearance. Investigators approached the car with anticipation, hoping it would hold answers to the mounting mystery. Instead, it only deepened their confusion. The car was unlocked, as if Hoffa had stepped out expecting to return within moments. The interior was pristine, no bloodstains, no signs of a struggle, and no indication that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. It was as though Hoffa had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a vehicle that held none of the answers investigators so desperately sought. Even more perplexing was the absence of fingerprints. Forensics teams scoured the car's surfaces, but they found nothing useful, no smudged prints, no trace of an unfamiliar presence. It was an impossibility for such a clean scene to exist, especially for a man who had been in and out of his car throughout the day. This absence of evidence suggested meticulous planning by whoever was behind Hoffa's disappearance. The unlocked doors raised another question. Had Hoffa been in such a hurry that he forgot to secure his car, or was it left that way deliberately by someone else? Investigators speculated that Hoffa's disappearance had been quick, but not necessarily violent, at least not in the parking lot. If there had been a confrontation, it left no trace behind. Police canvassed the area for any indication of tampering or suspicious activity near the car, but nothing came to light. There were no security cameras to capture the scene, and no witnesses who saw anyone approaching or leaving the vehicle. Even the parking lot itself, a typically busy suburban space, seemed to have swallowed the moment whole, leaving no clues in its wake. This lack of evidence turned Hoffa's car into more than just a starting point for the investigation. It became a cornerstone of the mystery. How could one of the most well-known figures in America vanish without so much as a scuff mark to suggest what had happened? It was as though every detail had been carefully erased by someone who knew exactly how to operate under the radar. For investigators, the car was a symbol of the precision and planning behind Hoffa's disappearance. Whoever had orchestrated this was no amateur. They had created a crime scene so clean it left nothing to uncover. The Pontiac Grand Ville, sitting in its parking spot, was both the beginning of the investigation and a dead end, a chilling reminder that Hoffa's fate had been sealed by someone with the power to make him disappear without a trace. As the days turned into weeks after Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, the vacuum of concrete evidence was quickly filled by speculation. Everyone, from law enforcement to the media and even Hoffa's own allies, had a theory about what might have happened. But in a world where power struggles and betrayal were part of daily life, sorting fact from fiction was no easy task. The most prominent theory, and the one investigators leaned on heavily, was that Hoffa had been abducted and killed by the Mafia. His deep ties to organized crime, combined with his efforts to regain control of the Teamsters union, put him at odds with powerful mob figures. Men like Tony Provenzano and Tony Giacalone, both suspected of orchestrating the meeting that never happened, had plenty of motive. Hoffa's return to union leadership would have disrupted lucrative arrangements the Mafia had built with the Teamsters during his absence. But the Mafia's potential involvement wasn't just about business. Hoffa's volatile relationship with Provenzano had boiled over into personal animosity. Provenzano had allegedly threatened to kill Hoffa in the past, making him a prime suspect in the eyes of the FBI. The theory painted a chilling picture. Hoffa lured to a meeting under false pretenses, betrayed by men he had once considered allies, and silenced permanently. Then there was the possibility of union rivals outside the Mafia's influence. Hoffa's ambitions to reclaim the presidency of the Teamsters had created enemies within his own ranks. Some believed that his disappearance was orchestrated by those within the union who feared his return would jeopardize their own positions of power. In this theory, Hoffa's downfall came not from the underworld, but from those who knew his weaknesses best. A less sinister but equally debated theory suggested that Hoffa disappeared intentionally. Some speculated that he staged his own vanishing act to escape the mounting pressures of his life. Hoffa was no stranger to danger, and with powerful enemies on all sides, some theorized he might have gone into hiding, leaving behind the chaos to protect himself and his family. But for those who knew Hoffa, this seemed implausible. He was a fighter, not a man who would quietly walk away from a battle. Other theories took on more dramatic tones. Some suggested that Hoffa's disappearance was the result of a government conspiracy. His ties to organized crime and his knowledge of corrupt dealings made him a liability. Could federal agents or politicians have seen Hoffa as a threat worth eliminating? While tantalizing, this theory lacked substantial evidence and was largely dismissed by investigators. Despite the array of possibilities, each theory raised more questions than it answered. If the Mafia killed Hoffa, where was the body? If union rivals were involved, how did they pull off such a clean disappearance? And if Hoffa had truly gone underground, why had no credible sighting or communication ever surfaced? Theories weren't just speculation, they became part of the legend. Every new idea added to the growing mystique of Hoffa's disappearance, keeping his name in headlines and his fate in the public's imagination. But for investigators, theories weren't enough. They needed answers, and as the leads dwindled, the mystery of what happened to Jimmy Hoffa only grew darker. Jimmy Hoffa's ties to the Mafia were no secret. It was a relationship built on mutual need, one that fueled his rise to power within the Teamsters Union, but also tethered him to the darker underbelly of organized crime. By 1975, that relationship had become a double-edged sword, one sharp enough to cut him out of the picture entirely. During Hoffa's tenure as president of the Teamsters, the Mafia relied on him to funnel union pension funds into lucrative and often illicit ventures. Hoffa's control over billions of dollars in union assets gave him leverage, and he used it to secure loyalty from both the mob and his union members. But that leverage came with strings attached. Hoffa's power was as much a tool for the Mafia as it was his own, and as his ambitions grew, so did the tension. One of Hoffa's fiercest clashes was with Anthony Tony Provenzano, a high-ranking member of the Genovese crime family. Their relationship had once been amicable. Provenzano had supported Hoffa during his presidency, but by the time Hoffa was released from prison in 1971, that bond had disintegrated. The two men became bitter enemies, their feud escalating into outright threats. At one point, Provenzano allegedly told Hoffa, "You'll never run the union again. You're done." Hoffa's plans to regain control of the Teamsters Union directly threatened Provenzano's standing within the Mafia. With Hoffa back at the helm, Provenzano risked losing the lucrative deals and influence he had secured during Hoffa's imprisonment. To Provenzano, Hoffa wasn't just an obstacle, he was a liability that needed to be eliminated. Provenzano wasn't the only mob figure with reasons to want Hoffa gone. Russell Bufalino, a powerful and calculating crime boss, had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Hoffa's return to power risked unraveling the carefully orchestrated agreements between the Teamsters and the Mafia. Bufalino's reputation as a man who handled problems quietly and efficiently placed him squarely in the spotlight of suspicion. But Hoffa's determination to reclaim his position wasn't just about power, it was personal. He saw the Teamsters as his legacy, and he wasn't willing to let anyone, not even the Mafia, dictate his future. This stubborn defiance, however, may have sealed his fate. In the world of organized crime, loyalty was fleeting, and defiance was rarely tolerated. For the Mafia, Hoffa's disappearance would serve a dual purpose, removing a threat and sending a message. Silencing him would eliminate the risk of exposure while demonstrating the consequences of crossing the mob. The precision of his vanishing act bore all the hallmarks of a Mafia operation, meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, and shrouded in secrecy. Still, questions linger. If the Mafia was behind Hoffa's disappearance, why was nobody ever found? Did they use a trusted associate to lure him to his death? Or was the entire meeting at the Matcha's Red Fox a fabrication to disguise the real plot? And how did they manage to pull off such a clean operation without leaving a trace? The Mafia connection remains the most plausible theory in Hoffa's disappearance, yet it also leaves room for speculation. The men who may have orchestrated the plot, Provenzano, Giacomo, Bufalino, never faced formal charges for their alleged involvement, their silence as impenetrable as the Code of Omerta itself. To this day, Hoffa's entanglements with the Mafia stand as both the key to his rise and the likely cause of his fall, a cautionary tale of how power ambition, and betrayal can converge in the shadows. Over the decades since Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, whispers of confession have surfaced from the shadows of the underworld. Men claiming to have inside knowledge or even direct involvement have come forward with chilling details. Each story adds a new layer to the mystery, but none have offered the definitive proof needed to close the case. One of the most famous confessions came from Frank the Irishman Sheeran, a former Union leader and self-proclaimed hitman for the Mafia. In his later years, Sheeran claimed that he was ordered by Russell Bufalino to kill Hoffa. According to Sheeran's account, he lured Hoffa into a house in Detroit under the guise of a meeting. Once inside, he shot Hoffa twice in the back of the head. Sheeran alleged that Hoffa's body was then cremated at a nearby funeral home, leaving no trace. While Sheeran's confession gained significant attention, it was met with skepticism. Critics pointed out inconsistencies in his story as well as a lack of physical evidence to corroborate his claims. The house Sheeran described was searched, but forensic testing revealed no evidence of a crime. Was Sheeran telling the truth, or was his confession an attempt to solidify his legacy in Mafia lore? Another chilling confession came from Salvatore "Sally Bugs" Bergoglio, a known mob enforcer and associate of Tony Provenzano. Before his own murder in 1978, Bergoglio was rumored to have admitted his role in Hoffa's disappearance to trusted associates. Allegedly, Bergoglio claimed Hoffa was killed in a mafia-controlled hit and that his body was disposed of in a New Jersey landfill, later dubbed the Hoffa dump site. However, Bergoglio's confession was never officially recorded, and the landfill theory, despite numerous searches, yielded no remains. Tony Zerilli, another mob insider, presented a different story. Zerilli, the son of a Detroit mafia boss, claimed that Hoffa was killed and buried on mafia-controlled property in Michigan. He even identified a specific location, a vacant lot he referred to as a mafia burial ground. The FBI conducted a search of the site in 2013, but found no evidence to support Zerilli's claim. Then there are the more outlandish confessions. Some have claimed Hoffa's body was buried beneath Giants Stadium in New Jersey, a theory so pervasive that it became a part of pop culture. Others have suggested his remains were encased in concrete or dumped in the Great Lakes. Each theory, no matter how bizarre, has kept the story alive, feeding the legend of Hoffa's disappearance. Despite the array of confessions, none have provided the smoking gun investigators need. The conflicting stories only deepen the mystery, leaving everyone to wonder who, if anyone, is telling the truth. Were these confessions genuine, or were they attempts by aging mobsters to gain notoriety in their final years? The FBI and other authorities continue to weigh these accounts against the evidence, but the lack of tangible proof leaves the case open-ended. Each confession is like a piece of a puzzle, tantalizing but incomplete, hinting at a picture that may never fully come together. For now, the confessions remain haunting echoes of a crime shrouded in secrecy, each voice adding to the question that still looms. What truly happened to Jimmy Hoffa? The most baffling aspect of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance isn't just the act itself, it's the eerie absence of his body. In a world where even the most carefully concealed crimes often leave behind some trace, Hoffa's vanishing act stands apart. Nearly 5 decades have passed, and not a single shred of physical evidence has emerged to confirm his fate. This singular fact has propelled the mystery into legend, with theories about the whereabouts of Hoffa's remains becoming almost as infamous as the man himself. One of the most enduring theories suggests Hoffa's body was buried beneath Giants Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. The idea was first popularized in the 1980s and quickly became a part of pop culture. According to this theory, Hoffa's body was transported across state lines, encased in concrete, and entombed under one of the stadium's end zones during its construction. While the story captured the public imagination, it was dismissed by investigators when searches of the site revealed no evidence. Another widely discussed possibility is that Hoffa was disposed of in a mafia-controlled landfill in Jersey City, infamously dubbed the Hoffa dump site. Mob insider Philip Moscato and hitman Salvatore Sally Bugs Briguglio were both tied to this theory, with claims that Hoffa's body was crushed in a steel drum and buried among layers of industrial waste. The site was partially searched in the early 2000s but failed to yield results. Despite its plausibility, the landfill theory remains unproven. Some accounts suggest Hoffa's remains were incinerated to ensure no trace would ever be found. Frank the Irishman Sheeran's confession included a chilling claim that Hoffa's body was cremated in a Detroit funeral home shortly after his murder. This would explain the complete lack of evidence, but no definitive proof of such an act has ever surfaced. Other theories venture into the murky depths. Could Hoffa have been dumped in one of Michigan's many lakes or rivers? The Great Lakes themselves, vast and deep, have been proposed as a final resting place. The Mafia's history of using water to dispose of bodies lends weight to this idea, but the sheer size and inaccessibility of these waters make such a claim almost impossible to verify. And then there are the outlandish theories, the kind that straddle the line between speculation and myth. Some say Hoffa was dismembered and scattered across multiple locations to ensure his body could never be recovered. Others propose he was buried on private property controlled by the Mafia, his grave marked only in the memories of those who orchestrated the crime. The absence of a body is more than a logistical mystery. It's a testament to the precision of those who wanted Hoffa gone. In the world of organized crime, leaving no trace is the ultimate display of power and control. Hoffa's vanishing act wasn't just a disappearance, it was a message to anyone who dared to cross the mob. But this absence also fuels endless intrigue. Every theory, no matter how plausible or far-fetched, adds another layer to the enigma of Jimmy Hoffa. The missing body is a void that can never be filled, a question that keeps the story alive. Not just who killed Jimmy Hoffa, but where is he now? When Jimmy Hoffa disappeared on July 30th, 1975, the FBI immediately recognized the significance of the case. This wasn't just about a missing man. It was about unraveling a web of corruption, organized crime, and power struggles. Within days, the Bureau launched a massive investigation under the codename Hoffax, which would become one of the most exhaustive and frustrating cases in FBI history. The Hoffax Memo, a comprehensive internal document compiled just months after Hoffa's disappearance, became the cornerstone of the investigation. The memo meticulously outlined everything the FBI knew or thought they knew about the case. It named suspects, theorized motives, and pieced together the timeline of Hoffa's final day. Central to the memo were the names of Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, both of whom had deep ties to organized crime and were directly linked to Hoffa's last known plans. The memo suggested that Hoffa's disappearance was a mob-ordered hit carried out to prevent his return to power in the Teamsters union. It theorized that Hoffa's body was disposed of quickly and permanently, likely incinerated or buried in a location that would never be found. Yet, despite the thoroughness of the document, it was clear that the FBI lacked the one thing they needed most: hard evidence. Over the years, the FBI followed lead after lead, often running into dead ends. They wiretapped mobsters, infiltrated organized crime rings, and conducted covert surveillance, hoping to catch someone slipping up. But the Mafia's code of silence omerta held firm. Even as suspects like Provenzano and Giacalone faced unrelated charges and prison time, they never broke their silence on Hoffa's fate. One of the FBI's most intensive searches came in 2003, when agents dug up the ground beneath a suburban Detroit home once owned by Mafia associate Frank Coppola. Rumors had circulated that Hoffa's body was buried there shortly after his disappearance. The search yielded no remains, but it did show the lengths to which the Bureau was willing to go to solve the case. In 2013, the FBI turned its attention to a field in Oakland Township, Michigan, based on information provided by mobster Tony Zerilli. Zerilli claimed Hoffa was buried in a shallow grave on Mafia-owned land before being relocated. The excavation was highly publicized but, like previous efforts, failed to produce results. Throughout the decades, the FBI amassed thousands of pages of documents, recordings, and interviews related to the case. Yet each breakthrough seemed to dissolve into uncertainty. The Bureau faced challenges not only from the lack of physical evidence, but also from the passage of time. Key suspects and witnesses passed away, taking their secrets with them. Despite the dead ends, the Hoffa's memo and subsequent investigations have kept the case alive, serving as a blueprint for modern efforts to uncover the truth. Even today, the FBI continues to review tips and analyze new information, holding out hope that one day the right lead will surface. The FBI's files on Jimmy Hoffa are as much a testament to the Bureau's determination as they are a reminder of the Mafia's power to erase its enemies. They tell a story of relentless pursuit, tantalizing clues, and an enduring mystery that, for now, remains just out of reach. The question persists: will the answers ever rise from the shadows of those files, or will Hoffa's fate remain buried in secrecy forever? Renewed interest in the Jimmy Hoffa case has sparked multiple modern investigations, with advanced forensic tools offering hope for answers. From ground-penetrating radar to DNA testing, authorities have explored every technological avenue to solve the mystery. One of the most publicized digs occurred in 2012 when the FBI searched beneath a driveway in suburban Detroit, following claims Hoffa was buried there. Another excavation in 2022 targeted a landfill in New Jersey based on new tips, yet, like all previous efforts, it ended in frustration. The case has resisted resolution not just because of its age, but because of the meticulous planning likely involved. Whoever orchestrated Hoffa's disappearance ensured there would be no evidence to follow, no body to recover, and no trail to uncover. Despite modern resources, Hoffa remains elusive, his story frozen in time, a riddle defying resolution. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance transcended the realm of crime into the fabric of American culture. His story has inspired countless books, movies, and documentaries, cementing his legacy as an enigmatic antihero. Films like The Irishman reignited public fascination, painting vivid, if speculative, portraits of Hoffa's relationships and possible end. Hoffa became a symbol of both ambition and the perils of power. His name is synonymous with the dark intertwining of labor unions and organized crime, shaping how generations perceive corruption and the fragility of influence. The public's obsession with his case speaks to its timeless appeal, a blend of mystery, betrayal, and intrigue that continues to captivate. Renewed interest in the Jimmy Hoffa case has sparked multiple modern investigations, with advanced forensic tools offering hope for answers. From ground-penetrating radar to DNA testing, authorities have explored every technological avenue to solve the mystery. One of the most publicized digs occurred in 2012 when the FBI searched beneath a driveway in suburban Detroit, following claims Hoffa was buried there. Another excavation in 2022 targeted a landfill in New Jersey based on new tips, yet, like all previous efforts, it ended in frustration. The case has resisted resolution, not just because of its age, but because of the meticulous planning likely involved. Whoever orchestrated Hoffa's disappearance ensured there would be no evidence to follow, no body to recover, and no trail to uncover. Despite modern resources, Hoffa remains elusive, his story frozen in time, a riddle defying resolution. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance transcended the realm of crime into the fabric of American culture. His story has inspired countless books, movies, and documentaries, cementing his legacy as an enigmatic antihero. Films like The Irishman reignited public fascination, painting vivid, if speculative, portraits of Hoffa's relationships and possible end. Hoffa became a symbol of both ambition and the perils of power. His name is synonymous with the dark intertwining of labor unions and organized crime, shaping how generations perceive corruption and the fragility of influence. The public's obsession with his case speaks to its timeless appeal, a blend of mystery, betrayal, and intrigue that continues to captivate. While the world speculates, the Hoffa family has lived in the shadow of this unsolved case. For decades, they've fought for answers, only to be met with silence. Hoffa's children have publicly urged those with information to come forward, seeking closure for a man they knew as a father, not just a union leader. Their frustration with the investigation mirrors that of the public, but carries a personal weight. They've seen suspects die without confessing, watched theories crumble, and endured years of speculation. For the Hoffa family, the unanswered questions are not just a matter of curiosity, they're an unresolved wound. Despite all the investigations, the same questions persist. Why did Hoffa agree to meet with men he knew he couldn't trust? Who was the last person to see him alive? What role, if any, did Tony Provenzano and Tony Giacalone play in his disappearance? These unanswered questions keep the case alive in the public imagination. Each theory, confession, or lead only adds to the enigma. The absence of definitive answers makes Hoffa's disappearance one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. Among the many theories, a few rise above the noise. The Mafia theory, implicating Provenzano, Giacalone, and their associates, remains the most credible. The notion that Hoffa's remains were incinerated or buried in a remote location aligns with the Mafia's efficiency in eliminating threats. Others suggest government involvement, citing Hoffa's knowledge of political and criminal corruption. While less supported, this theory adds intrigue to an already complex case. Ultimately, the most plausible explanations reflect the power struggles and betrayals that defined Hoffa's life. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance is not just a crime story, it's a symbol of the secrets that power can bury. Nearly 5 decades later, it remains an open wound in the history of organized crime and labor unions, a testament to the reach of the Mafia and the vulnerabilities of those who dare to challenge it. The enduring mystery of Hoffa's fate continues to captivate because it embodies the unanswerable, the intersection of ambition, betrayal, and the perfect crime. As we revisit his story, we're left wondering what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa, and will we ever know? What do you think happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Was it the Mafia, a union rival, or something else entirely? Share your theories in the comments and join the conversation. If you're intrigued by mysteries like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more gripping true crime stories. Let's uncover the truth, one case at a time.